Now, a record 100 million people across the world have been forced to flee their homes. That's according to the latest UN figures. The war in Ukraine, as well as new or continuing emergencies in places such as Ethiopia, Afghanistan and Congo, have all contributed to this staggering figure. And more often than not, it's private initiatives that help those fleeing. Now, to mark World Refugee Day, which is today, we have this report from the Croatian capital, Zagreb, where volunteers have started a non-profit to support refugees and migrants.
The IUCR's free shop is open twice a week for refugees and the needy. Here, people can get clothing at no charge.
When we came here, we almost lost everything just to came here.
Thousands of migrants arrive in Croatia every year. Many say that after arriving, they were again expelled, forcibly and illegally, back out of the EU, across the Bosnian-Croatian border. Yet, some still make it here.
In the whole route that they passed, the whole journey that they had, this is one of the rare places where people like to come back because nobody is judging them here.
Many people come not only for the donated goods, but also just to drink coffee, talk to each other, to play. They come from Syria, Afghanistan, Cuba and other places. But recently, we are told, donations for migrants dried up. The reason? Many Croatians are donating only for Ukrainian refugees.
In that way, everybody forget that we still have other people here, refugees who also need help.
Even some Ukrainian refugees brought donations, because they themselves had received too much. Some of those donations went to Russians who had fled to Croatia.
Most of the people that we talked with are the mixed couples, so Russian and Ukrainian, or people who just didn't agree with what is happening in Ukraine and in Russia.
The free shop also wants to help recent arrivals integrate into the Croatian community. Many donors are Croatian and have been coming to help for years, such as Ivana Borosic.
It's in our human being that we should help people who are in need.
The mood out in front of the free shop is cheerful and relaxed. After journeys that, for some, have taken years, it's a bit of normal life for people far from home.
Matthew Saltmarsh works with the United Nations Refugee Agency and he joins me from Geneva in Switzerland. Hi Matthew, welcome to DW. So an interesting observation in the report that we just saw, plenty of donations for Ukrainian refugees, but next to no donations for anyone else. Is this something that you've experienced too?
Well, it's true that there has been a huge outpouring of compassion and support for Ukrainian refugees. And of course, we've seen that with European countries opening their borders, allowing temporary protection, and, hundreds of thousands of people across Europe and beyond opening their doors and giving financial support as well. And that's been really positive and we welcome that. But we do have that concern that came up in your report, that other parts of the world, refugee situations, refugee crises in other regions, particularly Africa, the Middle East, and Central and South America, could be affected in the sense that so much funding is going to the Ukraine that there may well be less at the end of the year for those other situations. And of course, it's desperately needed in many, many places.
Now, what's the most realistic outlook for Ukrainian refugees, say?
Well, of course, it's very difficult to say. There's 5 million who have registered as refugees, and then there's approximately 7 million who are displaced within the country. And of course, so much depends on the fighting and the evolution of the fighting, how long that lasts, whether it's contained to those eastern areas or whether it spreads again. So I think everything really depends on that. For the moment, some of the refugees have chosen to go back. Some of them have jobs, and if they're in safer areas, they've gone back to check their houses and so on. But a lot of the time, that's not sustainable. And there are still people who are going back and then coming back across the borders to stay in Europe.
Let's talk a little bit about this distinction that we touched on before between Ukrainian refugees and people fleeing from other places. How are you looking at it and how are you approaching it and dealing with it?
Well, obviously, there's been this huge outpouring of support, particularly in Europe. It's the neighboring countries, it's the neighboring region to Ukraine, and that makes sense. But our overriding message for this World Refugee Day, which is today, as you mentioned, is that everyone has the right to claim asylum, no matter where they are, no matter what they do, no matter how they travel or move. And of course, we've seen examples in the past in Europe, but also in other regions, of refugees not being given that access to asylum. So our overriding message really is, of course, provide that asylum to anyone who needs it and who's seeking it. And that's the best thing that can be done by states for refugees.
Now, Matthew, you've mentioned it before that there's been this outpouring of compassion towards Ukrainian refugees amid this exodus. But how optimistic are you that this trend will continue?
Well, we dearly hope, of course, that it will. I think we've shown the potential of support for refugees. And of course, it's now up to those countries to welcome the refugees, to allow them to integrate. And so far, the signs are very positive that is happening. The countries in Europe are offering access to services, to education, to health, and so on. Of course, there is a concern that over time, the longer that a situation drags on, that welcome could wear a bit thin. But so far, we haven't seen that. But of course, let's not forget there are so many other protracted refugee situations where the outlook for refugees is particularly dire. We think of Syria, more than 11 years now of conflict. We think of Afghanistan, 4 decades of conflict. And then we look across Africa at Ethiopia and other regions. So there are still big concerns in those areas.
Matthew Saltmarsh with the United Nations Refugee Agency, thank you.
Thank you.